Thank you. Thank you, DLD. I'm going to talk about PRISM. PRISM is most likely the most important and central technology story of the last 12 months, and I predict of the coming 12 months. I call that talk Through a Prism Darkly. There I am, wearing exactly the same shirt, it turns out, that I am wearing right now. I'm Michael Fertik. I'm the CEO of Reputation.com. We protect privacy and reputation online. We have just over 1.6 million customers in over 100 countries using our products to protect chiefly their privacy digitally. And I'm going to talk about PRISM. PRISM is a name I'm going to give to the entire spectrum of methods and technologies and surveillance programs that the United States has been undertaking and that have been revealed through the good journalism of Glenn Greenwald and others. If you are a PRISM expert, you may know that this is a slightly broader set of topics than PRISM in particular, but I'm going to use the word PRISM as a bucket to contain everything in this topic. So first, sort of a reality check about what PRISM is and what it is not. If you're an American, there are some things about PRISM that should not be surprising. First of all, it should not be surprising if you're an American that PRISM exists. PRISM, the revelations about PRISM, which have had a lot of heat and some light, have shown that, in fact, we did pass the FISA amendments in Congress. We did pass the Patriot Act. The United States Congress did authorize a lot of the stuff that we now call PRISM. So it's not actually a surprise. Secondly, it should not be surprising if you're an American that international communications are being deeply monitored. People outside the United States are being surveilled. And it should not be surprising also that there is some surveillance, there is some legal process around the surveillance. You can like it, you can say it's enough, you can say it's not enough, but there is some warrant process around collecting data at scale through what we call PRISM. Now, what may be surprising for an American, this is some of the juiciest information that seems to be bubbling up, is there are a lot of large data companies, whether they're telcos or internet companies, that seem to be creating, the rumor is, the story is, back doors so the government can actually get easier access to data about us. So if that is true, if there is a backdoor mechanism, that may be surprising because the data that we as consumers give to these companies may actually be much more easily accessed on a kind of a self-serve basis by the government. Now, what should be surprising if you're an American, this is a very important list. The most important revelation about PRISM is the bulk phone records. It is not clear that any single part of the legislation that authorizes any American surveillance whatsoever allows all of the phone calls, all of the metadata around phone calls to be collected and stored all at once. We're talking about 7 years of all the calls made to and from Verizon customers, which is enough of a footprint that pretty much everyone on the planet is ultimately implicated by first or second degree. Huge surprise, big surprise for us. Number two, the biggest other surprise is the United States has very good legislation separating domestic surveillance, which is basically the FBI, from international surveillance, which is basically NSA and CIA. And it appears that possibly accidentally, possibly on purpose, the PRISM surveillance is encompassing domestic only, meaning US to US communication, a big surprise for Americans. Now, if you're not an American, as most of you in this room are not, there are some things that may be surprising. First of all, you may be surprised that PRISM exists. It's not incumbent upon you to read America's laws. You also may be surprised that you've been signed up for US law, and that you are subject to US law, and that you are being surveilled under US law, even if you don't go to the United States. My guess is all of you do go to the United States. When I come here to Germany, I can't break German laws, but you can't break the American laws, even if you're sitting here in Germany talking to Germans, and you are inside the envelope. What also may be surprising is that the United States tech companies are collaborating with the United States government with respect to your data. So you are within the scope of the discussion. There's been a lot of discussion in European governments about how to stop this and whether it's possible to stop it or not. Hans-Peter Dietrich, who is, I think, the Interior Minister of Germany, made a deeply stupid comment saying that Europeans who don't want to be surveilled just shouldn't use Google or Facebook. I mean, every feature of this is just wrong. You can't avoid being surveilled anyway. And also, in my view, you should be able to use Facebook and Google without being surveilled. Now, there are a couple of elements here of PRISM that I think really should be surprising for you. The most surprising part is that your governments are collaborating with our government to surveil you. There's been a lot of heat and a lot of discussion about how European governments are annoyed with PRISM, but it's increasingly clear that European governments are benefiting from the United States' capabilities to surveil not just us or the terrorists, but also you guys. And so that should be one of the most surprising parts of PRISM. There's been a huge amount of sort of Sturm und Drang here. One of my favorite elements is sort of the European outrage with American revelations or revelations about American surveillance of European peoples and governments. It just doesn't feel authentic. If you look at how the data have been shared between the United States and Europe, it does not feel authentic at all. This is one of my favorite. There's a lot of headlines here, but my favorite photograph is coming up. Angela Merkel. Oh, here she is. This is my favorite emblematic picture of this story. Angela Merkel's very annoyed that her cell phone was tapped. Of course, we know that governments are looking to surveil one another's leaders. Outside of Germany, when I show this slide, pretty much everybody has some sense that it may be acceptable or desirable at some point to know what the Chancellor of Germany is secretly thinking. I can imagine that this audience may be antagonistic to that point of view. Certainly, however, what is true is that governments are looking out for each other's data. So let's just be very clear about this. This is a picture of our president traveling in Brazil in effectively a Faraday cage. He does not go anywhere without this tent. This is a tent that sits inside the hotel room next to the hotel room in which he sleeps. Because he knows, and his team knows, everywhere he goes, this is in Brazil, where Dilma Rousseff was very upset with our government for surveilling Brazilians. He does not travel without a set of technologies that prevent surveillance of him. This is a counter-surveillance setup. He goes in this hotel room. He does not read an important document, make an important phone call, get on the internet, or do anything else without sitting inside this cage. So we know that governments are in the business of spying on one another. We may be annoyed with the Angela Merkel cell phone surveillance. We may think it's kind of technically cool. I leave it up to you to decide. It's definitely, though, part of PRISM. So what does it all mean? The most important part of my talk today is to describe data as the new oil. Right? It is the new oil for the economy. Our personal data are the new oil for the economy. And we can be one of two, we can have one of two futures in our horizon. One is we can be data serfs, where our data are exploited without our knowledge or permission by people we cannot identify for purposes we can never know, or we can start to own our data. And the mission I'm on, the mission, thankfully, that many of you are on, increasingly entrepreneurs are on, is that you should be able to own your data, monetize it, know what's happening to it, and why. Your personal data are literally the hottest asset in the world. This is very much like the oil boom of a century and a half ago. It is the mineral rights moment, where you are either going to have a right to your own minerals, your digital DNA, or guys like me or others are going to take it away from you and continue to monetize it without your knowledge or consent. The basic trick of the internet, this is sort of the most interesting kind of global comment we can make about the internet economy. The basic trick of the internet has been to create something free, invite you to use it, collect your data, sell it to people you cannot identify for purposes you can never know. That's the basic trick. That's what guys like me are very good at. Okay? That's what the Silicon Valley economy is very good at. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing evil about it. It's just what we're good at. So the idea is that there are venture capitalists who are very good at finding entrepreneurs who create things free. There are entrepreneurs who are very good at creating things free. And then there's a market to buy as much data about you as they can possibly muster. That's what we do. Okay? And if you look at the first $1 trillion of wealth that's been created in the internet economy, if you set aside hardware companies and ISPs, 90% of what's left is this. It's mining your data. Now, it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be a situation in which we sell data to markets, including governments. It doesn't have to be a situation in which, by the way, roughly 1/3 in gross of American high-tech revenue comes from governments, including yours. This doesn't have to be a future in which there's a military-industrial data complex. Right? If you remember our old President Ike, who warned us of this. We don't have to imagine that this is the best of all possible worlds. We can imagine that there's a better future in which we are much more vigilant about our data. If I describe to you a ubiquitous, omniscient, detailed, interpolating panopticon enjoying the lawfully authorized use of force, it would sound like the Soviet Union. But it pretty much accurately describes the internet plus PRISM. That's what we're looking at. We know more about you than you know about yourselves, and that's the state of the state in the internet. And sometimes the government can get its hands on its data and then throw you in jail as a result. Right? We've accidentally worked ourselves backwards into an environment that no one who invented the internet thought was possible. And we can do much better. We can imagine what the guys who founded the internet would have called the authentication layer of the internet. We can imagine that you would have a door to walk through, a passport to give, a key to unlock the parts of the internet that you want to unlock, and you only give away the minimum amount of information required and possible to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. Some companies, whether they are internet media companies today or telcos, are trying to accomplish this. They're trying to reverse engineer the authentication layer of the internet to finally put human beings at the middle of the internet. Probably the greatest myth, I think, that's told about the internet is that people are the center of the internet. Turns out that large companies that are media businesses are the center of the internet, and we are mostly objects, not subjects or verbs. This is not venal, it's not evil, it's an accidental outcome of how the internet has grown up. I believe we can own and control our data. And so I propose three laws that would allow us, modeled after Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, which worked out mostly most of the time, if you know those stories. 3 laws of data. First, you should be able to know what any company knows about you at any time. You should be able, number 2, to know with whom they share the data and in what format. What do they know about me, and with whom do you share it, and in what format? How often? And number 3, you should be able to demand a deletion of your data whenever you want, or a cessation of the collection. Number 1, know what they know about you. Number 2, how do they share it and with whom? Number 3, stop collecting my data or delete what you know about me. Now notice what I did not say. I did not say you should be able to port your data from one place to another. Some people say, well, listen, Facebook should allow you to take your Facebook data and move it somewhere else. I'm not sure that's fair to Facebook. But you can see a world in which we can ask a company to tell us what they know about us, with whom they share it, and then, hey, stop collecting it or delete it when I request it. Here in Europe, you're talking about the right to be forgotten or the right to delete. That's sort of a form of this. I wish there was a little bit more tech savviness in that discussion than there appears to be, but it's certainly in the right direction. Now, you do have something to protect. You do have something to lose, and you do have something that you can own, in my view. And if PRISM gives us anything, it is what I would call the Michelangelo moment of the internet. Michelangelo moment of privacy. If you remember, and many of you will, the Michelangelo virus from 1991 and 1992. It was actually not different from any of the other viruses that were appearing on disks and getting distributed to the computer networks by hand, but it got the attention of the public. And after it got the attention of the public, there arose both legislation, but also, more importantly, in my view, perhaps an American view, a series of companies built to give you protection from viruses. What I'm hoping, now that that's a $50 billion industry that's very robust, very sophisticated, what I'm hoping is this is the Michelangelo moment where finally this kind of privacy invasion that is being described now by the government, but happens all the time by so many parties, will finally give rise to enough awareness and attention that there will be the rise of companies in this area that can protect us from privacy invasion. I'm very encouraged, for example, by the rise of Snapchat. It's not perfect, but Snapchat completely proves that there's a massive appetite for private communications, ephemeral communications, where you and I get to know what I said, but somebody else only gets to know it for a very short amount of time, and then it disappears forever. 400 million snaps a day. We now know there's a market for privacy technology. Thank you very much.